welcome back to your channel. First and foremost, I want to express my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for your unwavering support. Your encouragement has been the driving force behind the growth of this community, and I am truly grateful for every like, comment, and share. Now, let's dive into another intriguing story together. Gather round and get ready for another adventure. I was left home alone a lot as a kid, just due to the fact that my dad was single for a good chunk of my upbringing, and he worked as a paramedic on a crappy paramedic schedule. My sister went away to college. This was a night that my dad was working an overnight. It was a weekend night, so I had this guy Jake over, who I was talking to, and he hung out for a while. We watched a couple movies and whatnot, and eventually, he had to go home because his parents don't like him out late. So I was left alone to hold down the fort. I continued to watch TV in my room in bed. My bedroom is downstairs next to the front yard, so when someone dragged one of the chairs on the porch outside, I heard it. I got up and looked out the window and saw someone sitting on one of the porch chairs down below. I called Jake's name, thinking it was him. After all, he'd only left under 5 minutes ago. Whoever it was looked up at me, but it wasn't Jake. I immediately pulled away from the window to hide. That was not anybody I recognized, not in the darkness at least. I texted a few close friends in our group chat if it was one of them messing with me. The ones who answered all said no and asked what I was talking about. I didn't really believe any of my friends would come to my house to mess with me like that anyway. Scared but still curious, I slowly walked back over to the window to look down again, and that person was still sitting in the chair looking up at my window. It was a he, that much was clear, and he definitely saw me. I hurried away from the window again to turn off the TV. I sat in my bed in a ball, basically, with my arms wrapped around my knees. I waited in darkness for a while. I didn't even want to turn my phone screen on because I was scared he'd see the light. I didn't even want to move because the window was open, and I feared that he'd hear any movement I made. I wanted him to assume I was just no longer in the bedroom. I waited enough time. It had to be a solid 10 minutes of just sitting there. I highly doubted that man outside could still be there. I finally mustered up the courage to get up and look out the window. I felt a little part of me die inside when I saw he was still down there looking up at my window. Instead of running away from the window again, I tried to be brave and said down to him, "What do you want?" I then noticed his shoulders started to go up and down as if he were laughing really hard, but he didn't make any kind of audible laughing sounds at first. Then I heard a slight whistling sound coming from him. It seemed like he was laughing so hard that he was wheezing. I asked him to please go away, then walked away from the window again. I went back to my bed. I was scared to call the police for some reason. I left my room and sat at the top of the stairway listening. The front door was being pushed. He was trying to get into the house. I ran back to my room to hide again. I was 15. I didn't know what else to do. Eventually, I heard the back door's doorknob being fiddled with, and the man trying to push the back door open as well. He gave up quickly, thank God. I closed my bedroom window and curtains. If our doors weren't locked, I could have been killed easily. I was skinny and weak when I was 15, and definitely not a fighter. I didn't leave my room again that night until until my dad got home around 9. I told him what happened, and his reaction was angry at me for not calling 911. In hindsight, that was very stupid of me. Later that night, I was awoken by a noise from the living room. Groggy and still frightened from the earlier incident, I crept out of my room. I froze when I saw the front door slightly ajar, swaying in the breeze. Panic surged through me as I realized the man had gotten in. I turned to run back to my room, but he was there, standing at the end of the hallway, grinning with a malicious glint in his eyes. I never even had a chance to scream. Second story. I was home alone for an entire week one time when I was still a teenager living with my parents, which was a rare occasion since my parents didn't go out a lot. My dad's colleague, Mr. Harris, invited my parents on a work retreat that he was organizing. I'm an only child, so I was left alone in the house. We lived in a remote area of upstate New York, in a town called Maplewood. My parents' house was surrounded by dense forest and was located on a long, isolated road that saw very little traffic. We had a large deck in the backyard overlooking the woods and a spacious backyard. There was a small koi pond and an above-ground swimming pool. It was a Friday night. I remember because I had been chatting with friends about weekend plans earlier that day. This was in October of 2020. I was out on the deck smoking weed, with my speaker playing music. That's when it started. I thought I heard a voice coming from the woods. I lowered the music and listened intently. It didn't repeat, so I turned the music back up. When the music was loud again, I heard the voice once more. This time, I turned off the music completely and listened closely. There was a voice calling from the woods, confirming that I wasn't just hearing things. A deep male voice was saying, "Hey, over here." He sounded distant, but not too far. The woods were about 50 yards from the deck, and that's where the voice was coming from. I didn't think for a second that the voice was calling out for me. I assumed it was some kids playing games in the woods. The voice called out again, "Hey, over here, we need help." This time, the voice was louder and clearer. When someone yells for help, it naturally raises concern. I started to feel uneasy because now I was questioning if these yells were meant for me. The voice then yelled, "Straight ahead, please come help us." It was coming directly from the woods in front of me. I had a feeling this was directed at me. Reluctantly, I called back, "Who is that?" And the voice responded, "We need help. We're stuck." I called back, "What do you mean?" The voice replied, "Just come straight ahead. We need help." I got up from my seat, walked down the steps of the deck onto the grass, and started towards the woods. I called out, "I'm coming. Where are you?" The voice answered instantly, "Right ahead. I see you." I asked, "Are you alone or with someone?" This time, there was no reply. I stopped halfway to the woods, a bad feeling creeping over me. I started walking backward, back towards the house and the deck. I didn't want to turn my back to the woods, realizing there was something very suspicious about this situation. I made it back to the deck, and the voice didn't say anything else. If they truly saw me, and this was genuine, they would have called out again. It was clear they knew I was onto them, but who knew how many people were out there? Could have been one, could have been more. Getting stuck in the woods made no sense, especially if they could see me. What? Did they get tangled in some branches? I went inside and locked all the doors just to be safe. I sat in the living room for a bit, still high, which made me more trusting at first because of how relaxed I was. Then I heard the voice again, closer now, definitely in the backyard, and not the woods anymore. I heard splashing water. It could have been the pool or the pond. I rushed to the window to look. At first, I saw no one, but then the voice called out, "I see you," with a sinister laugh. I noticed him. It was one guy, at least one visible. He was partially hidden behind the pool, and I could only see his head. It was too dark to make out anything besides his long, dark hair. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it, hoping he would lose interest if he saw I wasn't responding. He was probably some deranged person who enjoyed tormenting people, and I didn't want to give him what he wanted. But then, there was a loud, aggressive banging on the window where I had just closed the blinds, and the guy was screaming, "Help!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get lost, you freak! The police are coming!" I kept shouting, trying to sound crazier than him. I heard him start to laugh on the other side of the glass. His laughter faded as he walked away. I sat back down on the couch, trembling, shaking, out of breath. I sat there for a long while, and it seemed like the guy had really left. Eventually, I decided to call the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later and searched the property, but they found no one. I still managed to get some sleep that night because weed helps me sleep. I wonder if I would have handled that situation any differently if I hadn't been high. The experience made me more paranoid about being alone and who I opened my door to. Even now, every time I hear a noise outside at night, my heart races, and I remember that shitty night. Third story. Child Ethan Williams would drive directly from campus after his last class on Friday to his job at a convenience store for 6 hours. After his shift was done, he'd go back to his grandparents' house. Usually, his grandparents weren't home on weekend nights, as they were the ones who were more often out socializing. Ethan pulled into the empty driveway, and as expected, everything was dark in the house. He needed to put his bike, which was still in his trunk, back into the shed in the backyard. So he removed the bike from the trunk of his car and rode it down the pavement, past the fence, into the shed. When he shut the shed door, he noticed the bathroom light upstairs in the house was on. He didn't remember seeing the bathroom light on when he passed the side of the house, so he assumed maybe one of his grandparents stayed home for the night. Ethan entered the house through the back door, and as he opened his mouth, ready to call for one of his grandparents, something deep down told him not to. Ethan went up the half flight of stairs from the den to the midsection of the house. He looked up the short stairway to the upstairs and saw light creeping into the hallway through the closed bathroom door. So, somebody was in there. He went upstairs, calling out, "Grandma? Grandpa?" There were no responses, but he was in very close range of the bathroom now, which made it odd. He approached the bathroom door again, calling out, "Grandma? Grandpa?" No response. Ethan figured maybe his grandma was in the bathtub with earbuds in or something. The door was locked, so one of them had to be in there. When the phone rang, he went downstairs to answer it, only to find out it was his grandpa calling, checking in to make sure Ethan made it home okay. His grandpa sounded a bit tipsy, as usual for Friday nights, so Ethan questioned him as to why he left Grandma at home while he walked back upstairs to the bathroom door. His grandpa seemed confused. Then Ethan noticed, at the bottom of the door, through the opening, two shadowy outlines of feet standing by the door, literally facing the door, right on top of it. Then Ethan's grandpa dropped a bomb and told him that his grandma was right beside him at the event. Ethan did the only logical thing he could do. He ran outside, hung up on his grandpa, and called the police. When Ethan looked up to the bathroom window, he saw the light turn off. 10 minutes of hiding in the bushes later, he heard the police out front, who, in the end, found nobody in the house. But as the police were about to leave, Ethan's phone buzzed with a new message. It was a photo of him, taken just moments ago, from inside the house, with the caption, "Next time, don't leave the door open." As time passed, the memory of the mysterious woman in the red dress began to fade, and life returned to normal. I moved on with my life, cherishing the lessons learned from that experience. The kindness I showed by returning the purse remained a small act of goodwill in my memory. To all of you who have followed along with this story, thank you for being here until the end. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to subscribe and like. I look forward to sharing more stories with you in the future. Until then, take care and see you in the next adventure.